Greta Thunberg is frustrated about people like Tesla entrepreneur Elon Musk, who has become increasingly conservative and market liberal. She is mad about Ford's electric pickup and Bill Gates' many investments to control the patents for the CO2 neutral industry of the future. No matter how much the US continues climate transformation, Greta is not satisfied. She keeps moving the goalposts. She claims that this is not enough, this is just pretending, and all of those things. She does not want to be a one-trick pony with the CO2 issue, and she has already announced that she no longer wants to solely follow this well-trodden path of climate change. This is why she has rebranded herself as a pro-Palestine activist and left-wing icon with her current book. There is no back to normal, she says. Normal, meaning the system that gave us the climate crisis, a system of, quote, colonialism, imperialism, oppression, genocide, and racist, oppressive extractionism. So climate justice is just a part of other types of justice. You can't have one without the others, she says. Only the overthrow of the entire capitalist system will be enough. Now, the authors who actually wrote the text for her climate book are people like Jason Hickel, Kate Raworth, and Naomi Klein. Hickel came from the elite London School of Economics, with which the British colonial empire wanted to give itself a new image. He's a member of the Royal Society of Arts, just as Greta's mother is in a noble organization of that kind. And he holds a position in the US National Academy of Sciences. He doubts that people lived in poverty before the Industrial Revolution. Only the left-wing movements really improved people's living conditions. There was successful subsistence farming and other businesses in Africa and India before colonialism, he says. And for Hickel, capitalism only works through the exploitation of people and resources. America and Europe also emit the vast majority of CO2. Redistribution and state employment administration type systems would be needed. The magic word is degrowth. Not even the IPCC calls for degrowth. But Sandrine Dixon DeCleve, co-president of the Club of Rome, said, either we continue to promote a capitalist growth paradigm that promotes inequality, climate and health crisis, or we build our lives and livelihoods around a holistic system that delivers what is truly meaningful. Doesn't that just roll off the tongue? Problem is, you don't even know what they mean with these terms. What is a holistic system and what is truly meaningful? Who's going to decide who gets what and what the living standards will truly be? Despite the many problems of the existing capitalist market system, there are some really important parts about it. You can have a clear language, you can negotiate, and you can have a clear price, what something costs. Now, Karl Marx, back in his day, couldn't really figure out what the value of a work hour should be or of an item should be that somebody has produced. He made all sorts of woozy definitions and tried to obfuscate the fact that he truly didn't know. You may work in a factory making specific items, but then as a consumer you need to buy other items that other people have worked on. So how much of this should you get for that? In real-life socialism, the government was calculating precisely, what the state and what these state-run corporations were able to produce. They tried to figure out how many calories people needed per day, how many television sets they should have, and how many cars of what quality could be produced. If you drove a communist car in the Cold War, that was not a holistic experience. That was not truly meaningful. Instead, you were driving an underpowered car that was not safe at all. Kate Raworth, another author in Greta's book, studied at Oxford. That costs a lot of money. She worked at the Overseas Development Institute, which is basically a front for modern day and age British Commonwealth imperialism. Let's not mince words here. In 2017, Raworth published Donut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist, in which she further explains her concept of donut economics, first developed in her 2012 paper, A Safe and Just Space for Humanity. So this is like a graphic, and the inner ring represents 12 social foundations for humanity that have been identified as sustainable development goals. The outer ring consists of 9 planetary boundaries that Earth system scientists have identified as necessary for the planet's stability. It replaces the impossible goal of endless growth, they say, with the goal of thriving in balance. Again, what does that mean, thriving in balance? Will you have a car? What kind of a car? Will you have a house, or will it be a crappy apartment? And so on and so forth. Ravworth proposes a demurrage currency, and the idea behind this term is to pay a small fee if you stick to your money. In other words, if I keep my money in my wallet or bank account, I would have to pay a small fee to avoid losing value, so they force you to spend the money. Now that means you cannot really be frugal, you cannot really build wealth and invest in an ETF index fund or something of that nature and start building wealth over decades, and then your children can inherit that wealth and create even bigger wealth. No, that won't be possible in the future. And you kind of start to realize why very, very powerful circles, Western circles, why they are promoting this socialist nonsense, because they think they can control that sort of Western socialism. Now, of course, the Eastern Bloc is still at it. They kind of have their own variations of a control system, but ultimately, real-life, real-world socialism was always just another type of serfdom. In case you didn't know, in the past, the Middle Ages and before that, and throughout the ancient world, most people, around 90%, were serfs. A serf is not a full slave, but it's fairly close to it. They had to work day in, day out, and they had no rights, they could have no meaningful property, and this is how empires were run for millennia. Now, starting around the year 1700, things changed in imperialism because of modern science. The British Empire had the Royal Society for Science. They also gave it a sister organization called British Freemasonry, and they wanted to transform the empire. They wanted their own version of enlightenment. So put people in schools, in universities, in factories, not have them work as farmers so much. And this is how modern empires functioned. You could build more stuff and have bigger armies and better weapons. Now, for this new system to work, the old elites, they had to move into the shadows. They had to rule, with front organizations, political front organizations, and industry front organizations. This is how especially the British have done it. And there was always the danger of this system running out of control, the population becoming too wealthy and too smart. So this is why certain mechanisms were put into place to prevent that from happening. Especially when industrial capitalism was matured in the early 20th century, this is when elites in several Western countries, this is when they introduced a controlled version of socialism. So by getting more pay and getting better work hours, you were trading your opportunities to make more money for yourself and to get more power for yourself. This is how this scam worked. So nowadays, the Western elites, they have enough science, they have enough scientists, they don't need as many people anymore. So now we see the introduction of a new type of serfdom, and it will be painted green. It will look somewhat capitalist. You will still have jobs and corporations with the new CO2 neutral patents and so on and so forth. But there's going to be so much control that it is a modern type of serfdom. Naomi Klein also has an essay in Greta's book. In April of 2019, Simon & Schuster announced the publication of Klein's book On Fire, The Burning Case for the Green New Deal. And this is an American publishing house owned by Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, KKR. So this is where General David Petraeus is working, for example. In January of 2009, during the Gaza war back then, Klein supported the boycott sanctions campaign against Israel. And in November 2019, Klein, along with other public figures, signed a letter in support of Labour Party leader in Britain, Jeremy Corbyn, describing him as a beacon of hope. Now, these leftists don't really like the Muslim world because it's very much a patriarchy. It's very traditional, it's very religious, and it can also be very, very violent. It's sort of an old school imperialism. So for a long time you had a Muslim superpower, or let's say a large Muslim power, but the Muslims did not perform a controlled enlightenment. So this is why they fell behind these other more modern empires. But Islam still has very many imperialist traits. So you can't imagine Naomi Klein really wanting to live in a Muslim country, or Greta Thunberg for that matter. You don't see them being interested in putting on a headscarf and that sort of thing, or being married early to a guy they don't really know. But apparently they figure it serves their agenda more to side with the Muslims than to side with the Jews, because there's so few Jews and there's so many Muslims. And leftist strategy is, of course, the so-called critical theory, meaning you just complain about everything and you just try to get everybody hate everybody else. So the women are supposed to hate the guys, and the religious groups should be fighting with each other, and the young should hate the old, and so on and so forth. So the material in Greta's book is virtually the same as Klaus Schwab's so-called fourth economic theory. This was kind of the slogan for a long time. It's another new economic system, and it sounds pretty much like the donut I described earlier. It's based on strict limitations, all very controlled, and they basically want to bring together different types of ideologies. Now, of course, the Enlightenment era brought forth these new ideologies because some people who were very privileged, they had much to lose from change, so these became the conservatives, and then you had sort of the middle ground in the population. They wanted change, but not too much change, and then you had the poor people, and they had nothing to lose, so that's why they love change. So this is how these modern ideologies start. And of course, the Western powers, they have enough money to control the entire ideological spectrum, even the green stuff, even the left stuff, all of it. So Greta made the essential activist mistake. This is a mistake that almost everybody does at some point in their lives, especially when they're young. They believe there is a ready-made rebellion, ready to roll. You just have to join it. And this rebellion supposedly has figured everything out. They have found the world formula. You can just push the slogans of that group, and this is how you make progress. Now, obviously, it should be clear to anybody that very rich people, they can just buy up these movements fairly easily. Now, at some point, this Schwab fourth economic theory was rebranded as the Great Reset. And this was unveiled by Prince Charles, now King Charles, and WEF director Klaus Schwab in May 2020. Schwab was awarded, among other things, one of the highest British medals. King Charles belongs to the families of Sachsen, Coburg, and Gotha, as well as the House of Hessen. Very old families, they go back sometimes even 1200 years. It's a very, very large family cluster. You can find videos on my channel about that. Incredibly large family cluster with incredible intelligence capabilities throughout the many centuries. This is one of the things that I do my own research on. So the older Great Reset during the 1800s and 1900s gave birth to industrial capitalism and these warring ideologies. And now the new Great Reset in the 21st century, this is supposed to, present another great shift to secure the power structure that's already in place. So modern law of the 20th century and 21st century in various states, and also international law, such as that of the United Nations, prohibits slavery and serfdom. Serfdom was defined as Situational legal status of a person who is obliged by law, custom, or agreement to live and work on land belonging to another person and to provide certain services, whether paid or not, to that person without being able to independently change his status. Interestingly, in socialist regimes, citizens were and are obliged to live and work on certain properties and provide certain services without being able to independently change their status to any significant extent. So the change for the Russian farmers and workers and the Chinese workers, the change was now in socialism, you still had to work hard, you still had no rights, but the factory you worked in and the fields you worked on, that was no longer the personal property of an aristocrat. It supposedly belonged to everybody, the collective, but it was controlled by the party, Communist Party. And so, yeah, we might see a new version of serfdom. And so what you know, where you work doesn't necessarily belong to a single person. It could belong to or be controlled by a structure. And of course, Greta's sympathies for the Palestinian cause, that's about as fake as it gets. As I've mentioned, she probably would not want to live in a Muslim country. It's just a way to get more people angry. And even in the early Soviet Union, you saw this kind of framing. The Soviets wanted to frame all kinds of things as imperialists. So the state of Israel being attached to, you know, Britain and the United States, that of course meant they were labeled as imperialists, and anything against Israel is labeled as anti-imperialist. This was a very transparent strategy from Lenin and others in the Soviet Union. Soviet intelligence disseminated the protocols of Zion and similar texts on a large scale throughout the Muslim world for these very obvious purposes. Now, for a very long time, Muslims really didn't care about Jews because there were so few of those Jews. So the Muslim imperialism was more preoccupied with other larger empires such as the Persians, and they converted the Turks. And at some point, Islam actually went into Spain in Europe, and so they were clashing with Christian empires. So these were the enemies of Islam, and Jews really didn't matter to the Muslims. There was actually a phase during the Middle Ages where Jews actually preferred to live in Muslim countries rather than Christian countries, not because it was a great life under Muslim rule, but it was less bad as in Europe, for that matter. And only in the Soviet era and the dissemination of this propaganda, only then became this a problem, really a major problem for the Jews. You know, when now most Muslims believe these fairy tales about Jews running everything in the West. So of course this is based on many fairy tales, such as the Rothschild fairy tales, you know, how they supposedly took power, which is definitely not the case. You can find more information about that on my website and the video channel here. So the aristocratic family clusters, they built their own banking system, and you know, they employed some people for it that were Jewish. And the anti-Semitism was a way to hide certain things, and unfortunately this anti-Semitism got out of control in a major way. Even early socialism, the French socialists, they were pretty anti-Semitic. They tried to paint greed as quintessentially Jewish, and trade was Jewish to them, and all these things. So they needed some facade to their ideology, because they hated all kinds of trade, and they hated everybody who wanted to trade and you know, have that sort of a system. And anti-Semitism was just a way of selling socialism for these early French socialists, and quite a few of them are still being read today. And Karl Marx was influenced by that stuff, and later socialists were influenced by this, even though they dropped the anti-Semitism in public. So this is why today you have quite a bit of leftists aligning themselves with Islam. You can find my new book in the description below. There's the link. It's about these old, very old intelligence networks and how important they are to this very, very day. Please like this video, comment on it, share this content, and subscribe to this channel.